Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men, that's Adjectiveless X-Men, or Volume 2, number 25, cover dated October 1993. And this is again part of the X-Men 30th anniversary celebrations, Fatal Attractions. This is a story that follows immediately on from the special issue of Uncanny X-Men 304. Cover here by Andy Kubert and Matthew Ryan, and you can see there, I think, the hologram, which is of Gambit, and it's from an Andy Kubert drawing. So I'll just give you a look at the double cover to this issue. I hope you can see all of that on camera. So pretty good, focusing on Magneto and Wolverine, two major moments from this particular issue that perhaps weren't expected by readers. I know I wasn't expecting them when I read this, first of all, back in 1993, 30 years ago. And yeah, pretty good work on the cover by Andy Kubert. And new inker Matthew Ryan. Matthew Ryan inked the Andy Kubert cover to X-Men 24, but he is welcomed in this issue as the new regular inker of Kubert's work. And at the time, I thought it was a pretty nice combination of penciler and inker, and I still think that today. So let's move along and open this up to the first page. And we have 4 vertical panels here, and a device whereby there is verbal parallelism in the opening 3 captions. We have a view of the White House here, which evokes a view of the White House that we got also with Nick Fury in X-Men number 1. That's the Chris Claremont and Jim Lee X-Men. And there's quite a few homages to that particular issue in this one, which makes sense, of course. Also, there's a shot of the Kremlin there in Red Square, and we have Bill Clinton here on the phone to Boris Yeltsin, and they're talking about initiating the Magneto protocols. And we have Nick Fury here, and this is Forge, and Forge has obviously helped design what he is setting off here with this particular button. So then we move to a double page spread, which recalls Jim Lee's famous double page spread on pages 2 and 3 of Adjectiveless X-Men number 1. We also get here a quote of Claremont's first narrative caption on the first page of Adjectiveless X-Men number 1, near Earth space in the shadow of the Terminator, racing from day to night. That is his words from that first issue. So Fabian Nicieza quoting Claremont there. And in lieu of that full-size figure of Magneto, we get this focus on his head, a kind of a top-down view, and his hand here. Nicely done, and in my opinion, Matthew Ryan is doing his best Scott Williams imitation throughout this issue, and I like it. So what happens is an electromagnetic barrier is set up around the Earth via these different satellites, and it means that Magneto cannot go down to Earth and use his powers. So he says here, I warned them not to do this. Why did they seek to provoke me? What will it take for them to leave us alone so we may forge our own utopia, removed from their petty, pathetic lives? So he sees the Earth's act of defense as a provocation, and he's going to do something about it. Here we've got a nice anchor image of all of those who've accepted his offer to come up to Avalon, which is the name of his ship that's orbiting above the Earth, and which he's built with Shi'ar technology that he is it stole or borrowed from his time as headmaster of the New Mutants in the X-Mansion. And Professor X, of course, sees that as a betrayal of his trust and friendship with Magneto. So Magneto says here, for too long I've played a fruitless tete-a-tete with those humans in positions of power. I'd always hoped that as administrations came and went, as figureheads changed one day eventually, those who believed in the rights of mutants to exist free from persecution would attain power. It was, I know, a foolish hope, born out of my desire to never become that which I despised in my younger days. A despot, a tyrant, a Hitler. And Exodus says, yet there must come a time when even deaf ears must be made to listen, Lord Magnus. You're correct, Exodus, he says. Indeed, that time has come and gone long before we even sought refuge here among the heavens. So this is interesting because the version of Magneto that we saw in Uncanny X-Men 304, scripted by Lobdell but ordered by Bob Harras to rewrite Magneto in order to be more villainous. Points were made to Magneto in that issue by Professor X in particular, that he was taking a position akin to Hitler's. And here we have that addressed in Nicieza's dialogue for Magneto. It is something that he does not want to be, but that he feels he's forced to take tyrannical action in order to save his people, that is Homo superior mutant kind. So he heads out into space, riding the electromagnetic field, and then he takes out one of the satellites, and we're told he concentrates, muttering a silent prayer to a god he no longer believes in, and cuts a swath across Earth's electromagnetic field, like a battle-forged blade through soft flesh. And then we're going to see the outcome of that. And I like this always in kind of momentous world-spanning events in Marvel Comics. You would see its ramifications showing up with other characters in the Marvel Universe. And here we peep in on the Fantastic Four, something Claremont used to do, but hasn't been done in a while since his departure from the X-Books. So here we see the lights going off in Manhattan, and in addition, the Baxter Building, or rather, I think at this point it was Four Freedoms Plaza. And so Reed Richards here diagnoses what's happened. A pulse wave hit us unlike any I've ever encountered before. It swept right over us, and it shows no signs of abating. And so we followed the pulse wave, the electromagnetic pulse wave, all around the world. In Tokyo, Japan, it takes out Sunfire. Here in the Kremlin again, it takes out the electricity, everything. Then we peep in on Braddock Manor. We've got Nightcrawler and Captain Britain there, even though this is a continuity error because at the time Captain Britain was lost in the time stream. So this is another one of Bob Harris's goofs or mistakes. That's happening on his watch, and he's the one to blame. Then it crosses the Atlantic, the White House goes dark, and then the only place that's got any tech that is capable of working is the Shi'ar tech at the X-Mansion. So we've got Banshee and Beast here rebooting the electronics of the house. And then Banshee says, let's be on with it. We'd best tell Charles that, it's Magneto who's struck. So here we go, we're on our title page, and we've got a splash here of X-Men Gold and Blue teams. We've got Psylocke there and Revanche. At this stage we've got Moira McTaggart and Banshee too. And Professor X is addressing his children, quote unquote. And the creative team here is Fabian Nicieza, writer, Andy Kubert, penciler, Matt Ryan, inker, Bill Oakley, letterer, and Joe Rosas, colorist. Proudly presenting the 25th issue of X-Men. And I like this little scroll down here with a dedication to Stan and Jack, Roy and Neil, Len and Dave, Chris and John, to all those who've come before us and all those who will come in the next 30 years. And in 2023, 30 years have passed since this celebratory issue. Title of the story is Dreams Fade. So Professor X says to his assembled X-Men, I've called you all here because there is something I must tell you. So he says, obviously, we have a problem, and then Scott briefs everyone on the problem. Nice little color hold here by Joe Rosas. And he says that the Magneto protocols have been initiated. The alpha and beta options of the protocols involve the activating of a defense shield which spreads across the planet. But it was intended to protect humanity without the appearance of provocation, but that hasn't worked out because Magneto sent his pulse wave across the planet, and Scott says, in retaliating, Magneto has effectively rendered the mechanical and technological resources of this entire planet completely useless. But Professor X makes the point that the pulse wave was terrifyingly devastating in its ferocity, and Rogue asks, how bad was it? So this is it. Cyclops says we can't really know for sure. We're only online because we have the advantages of the alien Shi'ar technology. And he says, from the garbled static we have been able to piece together, we know it's bad, really bad. Plane crashes, medical equipment failure. And Professor X says quietly, we fear many hundreds, perhaps thousands have died. But think about it. Like if there's plane crashes, if there is medical equipment failing, it's got to be hundreds of thousands, if not maybe a couple of million people who've perished by Magneto's action. So it's been downplayed in the dialogue here. But in reality, if you think about it, it has to be hundreds of thousands, if not a couple of million, that die from Magneto's action. So Rogue gets it. This is insane. Why didn't he warn us or something? So we have Professor X coming down to the hard point that we are fighting for our very survival. And if we do not fight to win, this planet will be irrevocably lost to us. So he tried to reason with Magneto in the previous part of this crossover, that is Uncanny X-Men 304. Now he's going to get tough. So we have a little clandestine meeting of the most senior members of the original 5 X-Men. I really like this top-down angle by Andy Kubert. It looks really good on the characters. Excellent work from him here. And Scott saying he doesn't like it one bit. So what they're concerned about is, well, Scott in particular, the first X-Man, is concerned that the original beliefs they all shared seem so outmoded lately. But Jean and Beast are true believers, and they quote Professor X to Scott, and then he feels reaffirmed in his commitment to the dream. But then they're interrupted by Professor X himself. Turn the page, there's a bit of a surprise coming. So here in the anchor image, we see he's using some Shi'ar tech in order to create an exoskeleton that operates on sonic energy, so he's able to walk. But it takes almost all of his telepathic power to do this. So he's going to need help for the strike that he plans on Avalon. So here we get the plan. So he says here, he structured an assault team as a combination of skills and attributes. We've got Wolverine and Gambit, combining the best elements of stealth, subterfuge, and guile to infiltrate Magneto's base. But of course, let's not forget, Magneto has always dealt with Wolverine by virtue of his metallic skeleton, or his skeleton laced with adamantium metal. Then Jean and Xavier with telepathic prowess to attack Magnus at his weakest point, his tortured soul. And Quicksilver and Rogue, as well as speed, strength, and the strong desire to settle unresolved emotional conflicts. So this is the strike team. And there's a reason the others aren't going. And Scott gets it. Inside a space station, we high-octane energy wielders, like himself, like Storm, don't come in too handy. But what about some of the others? Why not include more of your original students who fought this battle with Magneto almost as long as you? So why not Archangel? Why not Iceman? And Beast makes the point, because you don't expect to come back, do you, Charles? So it's a suicide mission, yes? Or it could be. So basically everybody gets ready, and like Rogue in particular is worried about whose side she's going to be on when push comes to shove. That unresolved emotional conflict going back to the Savage Land issues, when Magneto chose Rogue to save Rogue over Carol Danvers in Uncanny X-Men 269. Then we've got Aurora here, and she is wondering about why they haven't been asked to share the risk of the other X-Men. And Professor X says, "For my entire life, I've fought for the sake of a dream. Aurora Magnus is the cause of what I believe is a nightmare. But what happens when the dream becomes the nightmare?" he asks. He says, "Dreams fade, dreamers come and go, but the hope which fuels the fires of our passion or goal must not die out." So there must be survivors. And he puts his hand on Cyclops' shoulder, and that's basically a passing of the baton should Professor X and the rest not return from Avalon. So here we've got a nice anchor image of them getting ready to be teleported up to Avalon via the Shi'ar tech that is seated in the basement of the X-Mansion. And so off they go. And we've got Beast here quoting from Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound. And that's an interesting point, because later on in the issue, Magneto himself also quotes from Prometheus Bound. So there's a bit of a mistake here. Nicieza's mistake. Prometheus Unbound is Percy B. Shelley's poem, but Aeschylus's original play, the tragedy, is Prometheus Bound. And of course it's about a titan who defies the gods and fate, and who's punished for that. So we'll see how that theme plays out in this particular story. So they arrive on Avalon, and Colossus, of course, in Uncanny X-Men 304, because of his grief, because of his despair regarding Professor X's dream and what it's done to him and his family, shifted allegiances and took up Magneto's offer to go aboard Avalon. And here he's got divided loyalties, so he switches off the internal security sensors and cloaks the X-Men's arrival on Avalon and covers for them thereby. So then they make their way through the ship, and they come across Rusty and Skids here, who are about to attack them. Wolverine pops his claws, but then Jean intervenes and starts to argue with them. Rusty, how? By separating yourselves from the very people who have to learn to accept us before peace will ever occur. But Professor X, and this is an interesting character point, part of his tougher attitude now is he just doesn't have time to reason with Rusty and Skids, so he knocks them out. Jean is kind of shocked and taken aback. You forced them to fall asleep, so you acted for them. How unlike what Magneto or Strife did to them. So, but as I said, Professor X has toughened here, and he sends Quicksilver out to insert a disc that will give them control of certain of the ship's systems. Rogue sees, that this is just like our system at home, gang, so piece of cake. And they're getting ready to ambush Magneto by teleporting, taking over control of the teleportational systems in Avalon to teleport out the acolytes. Now, one acolyte that they do not take away is Colossus, which is interesting because that will play out later. And then they send the acolytes out in a shuttle away from Avalon. And of course, you're going to get a reaction from the boss, from Magneto. And here we've got a great anchor image of Magneto. Definitely Kubert looking at Jim Lee's and Scott Williams' version of Magneto. This is quite evocative of that version here. And naturally enough, I like it very much. So Magneto declares that he will not let the X-Men stop him again. And whoa, great anchor image of Wolverine with his claws popped and ready to strike at Magneto. But Magneto says, Logan, we dance the dance again and again. And you've never learned the steps very well, have you? So he, as he's always done, he uses his magnetic power to grip the metal laced to Wolverine's skeleton and fling him against the wall of the ship. Then Rogue tries to reason with him as she did in 304. Don't you see, this time you've gone too far. People are dead down on Earth because of you. You swore that would never happen again. And he says, I was mistaken. That is the price they must pay, Rogue. As he binds her with rubble from the ship. So Jean starts to argue with him philosophically. But again, this hardened, resolved Professor X says, Jean, don't waste your energies in so futile a manner. Let the others occupy him. We must concentrate, as we discussed, on defeating him from the inside, from within his mind. So then they go inside as Gambit strikes Magneto with his charged playing cards, gets him in the face, right through the opening of his helmet, right in the eyes. And as that's happening, then we're right into Magneto's psyche. And he's taken aback because Professor X has gone right for the Nazis, machine gunning down Magneto's parents here at Auschwitz. And like, this has enraged him. So he says, you surprised me, Charles. I thought such manipulations abhorrent to you. You ask me, X-Men, why do I do what I do? And I ask you in return, how can you not? You see it in my mind, Xavier. How can you allow our race to be systematically eradicated by Homo sapiens, as so many innocents were by the Nazi butchers? So this is a better rationale worked out here by Nicieza for Magneto, kind of returning to that more Silver Age, hardcore attitude, separatist attitude. It's more developed, more worked out. We're getting some moral greys and blurring going on here in this issue between Magneto's cause and Professor X's dream. So Rogue is horrified at what Magneto does, slicing across Gambit's face and mouth, and she punches him. So of course Rogue has super strength, and he feels that one, and then we're right in his mind again. And these images that we're seeing here are evocative again of Jim Lee's work on Magneto in 274, and in particular 275, the Savage Land section of Uncanny X-Men 275. So clearly he was looking at that and homaging it. And there's one particular image coming up that is a real homage to like an image of Lee's from 275. I'll point it out when we get to it. So here we have an interesting point where we have Professor X working on Magneto's guilt over the death of Doug Ramsey. So Magneto, of course, was headmaster at the mansion while Professor X was away with Lilandra and the Shi'ar Empire. And he was in particular charged with the responsibility of taking care of and training the New Mutants. And Doug Ramsey died on his watch, and he feels tremendous guilt about that. And now he's attacked by his own son, Pietro Maximoff. And so we get some recriminations by Pietro concerning what kind of a father Magneto was. And then we have Professor X continuing to manipulate Magneto in his psyche regarding his relationship to his family, and his wife Magda running away from him with Pietro and Wanda. And of course, Jean makes the point that they were, well, Magneto makes it himself, that they were, like Magda was pregnant with them, but they hadn't been born yet. So his memories are being manipulated in order to ramp up the pressure on him. And he says here himself, "Very devious, Charles, but in the face of your subversion, your befouling of my mind, I stand resolute." So Pietro goes up against his father again, but Magneto says, "I cannot have my only son leave the paradise I hope to create here, to see him try and compromise my efforts on earth below us. I cannot allow you to betray me, Pietro, to become my Judas. So his son must be slain." And here's Wolverine, recovered from the earlier blow and getting ready in the shadows to pounce. So here we're coming to some of the key climaxes of this celebratory anniversary issue. Great anchor image here as Wolverine leaps at Magneto and slices him in the gut. He guts him. But this is interesting here. The artwork has been corrected, and the damage he's done just isn't visible here, but we get it in the dialogue and in the reactions. Like Jean saying, "Look at him, he's bleeding badly." And this is a callback to X-Men #1, Adjectiveless X-Men #1, when Wolverine similarly got the drop on Magneto when Magneto was in a weakened state and cut him the same way, gutted him, and Fabian Cortez used his powers to help Magneto recover from that wound. But ultimately, Fabian Cortez was intriguing to kill Magneto. So here we are, Wolverine's ready to deliver a killer blow, but Magneto says, "Our long association, my most visceral enemy." There's the hint again, like his guts are hanging out here in reality. "My most respected foe is over." So magnetic fire courses through Wolverine's body, and here we go. This is something I wasn't expecting as a reader way back when, and it begins with a small tug, an almost gentle pull, a harder yank, and Wolverine's taken aback. Then a wrenching tear. Like the imagery here, this in particular is evocative of Weapon X. You can see some of my reviews of Weapon X on the channel too. Logan, Jean is shocked. And Professor X too, taken aback and begs Magnus not to do it. But here we go. Look at this. Magneto ripping the adamantium out of Wolverine's body, ripping it from the bones. And he says, and he quotes here Prometheus bound, Aeschylus' Prometheus bound. "Now play the insolent, now plunder the gods' privileges and give them to creatures of a day. What drop of your sufferings can mortals spare you? We are all but bit players in a tragedy far larger than any of us, he says, a tragedy called life, Logan. But today for you, perhaps for me, the curtain falls and the play is finished. So Jean cries out. She's the one person who has, since the day she first met him, and perhaps always will, love him. That may be a surprise to some readers. So Logan is in serious trouble here, but Rogue perceives that he's still breathing. Magneto here trying to keep his guts in, but he's dying. And now in his weakened state, Professor X attacks. And this is the homage to an image from Uncanny X-Men 275, when Jim Lee drew Magneto thinking back about the horrors he had endured, with the addition of Doug Ramsey's gravestone here by Andy Kubert. But this of the Nazis machine gunning his parents or whoever, or inmates of Auschwitz. You can check that out, and I've got a video on 275 on the channel too. So Professor X winds up to say that he is going to do something about Magneto because he's failed to rise above the horrors perpetrated on him in the past. And he says of himself, and as for me, maybe I've failed as well, denying the need to stop such horrors, no matter what the cost. So he's getting ready to do something drastic here. And, there's an emergency. They need to get Wolverine off Avalon. Jean says she's telekinetically keeping his body together and telepathically preventing his mind from understanding how much damage was done to him. But we have to leave now. So Magneto thinks he's going to escape this one, but Professor X says, billions of lives need saving, Magnus. We came here today to sacrifice our own so that those lives may be saved from your misguided wrath. And then Magneto asks him, or he says, by what right do you make such decisions, Charles? By what right do you do the choices you make for the lives of Homo sapiens and Superior alike? Make you any less misguided than I? And this is Professor X's response. It all boils down, finally, no matter how alike we are, to the fundamental difference in our views, Magnus. Mine is a dream to live in harmony with those who fear and despise us, to make them see the error of their ways, no matter the hardships we must endure, the sacrifices we must make to achieve that goal. And yours, quite simply, demands that we rule over those who would oppose us, no matter the cost in suffering and degradation. The difference between us is that of light and dark, love and hate, life and death. And then he says, no more, no more. And what does he do? He's had enough. He's going to make sure, here and now, once and forever, that Magneto will never kill again. And he wipes his mind, and Magneto's shocked. And we can see in the blankness of his eye that he never thought he would. But he has wiped his mind clean. And Rogue is taken aback. And the professor says, I took his mind away from him. God forgive me, he says. And then they're still in a tenuous, perilous situation in relation to Wolverine. They have to get him back to the mansion. And now Colossus arrives. He wasn't teleported out of Avalon. And he says here he sent a signal to the mansion, Bishop's coming in a modified Blackbird, because the teleportation systems on Avalon are out. For the sake of Logan and even of the professor, I recommend you leave quickly as soon as he arrives. That's Bishop. And Colossus elects to stay. Magneto has been left in a vegetative state, he says to Rogue. He will need someone to care for him. What I could not do for my sister Illyana, perhaps I can do for him. That will be, in many ways, a most fitting penance for my role in this affair. And so they leave, and Pietro has the last word here and says, perhaps, Peter Nikolovich, none of us ever were so certain about the choices that they've made. But does that in any way make them any less difficult or any less important, no matter the consequences, no matter the pain? Doing the right thing will always carry a heavy burden. So this issue has explored two dreams, two ways of saving mutant kind from human hate and fear, and both have been given the best cases for each. And Professor X has perhaps, in some readers, in some X-Men's minds, tarnished his dream by doing what he did to Magneto and using his telepathic powers in the way that he did. And the last narrative caption says, "And in the silence, one can almost hear the fading of a dream." So, dark times for the X-Men and for Professor X himself. And then the story continues in Wolverine number 75 for the aftermath of what has happened to Logan. So, I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on the anniversary issue, X-Men number 25, featuring Magneto ripping Wolverine's adamantium from his bones and leaving him, is it mortally wounded or what? And Magneto himself being mind wiped by Professor X. So do, if you enjoyed this video, like it in YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.